All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the unprecedented, truly staggering mathematical reality of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Look, if you follow global events at all, you already know this is a grinding, devastating conflict. But the sheer statistical scale of what's happening on the ground right now, the actual hard data behind the headlines, is something we really need to visualize to fully wrap our heads around.
So, let's start with Section 1, a staggering historical shift.
To truly grasp what we're looking at today, we really have to zoom out for a second. Think about the number 15,000. This represents the total Soviet troop fatalities across the entire 10-year span of the Soviet-Afghan War. That's a whole decade. 15,000 dead. It was a toll so vast that it literally shook Soviet society to its core and became widely known as the USSR's Vietnam.
And seeing these numbers side by side brilliantly illustrates the sheer mind-blowing scale of the current conflict. On one hand, you have 15,000 dead over 10 years in Afghanistan. On the other, more than 15,000 dead in just a single month in Ukraine. The pace of loss here has accelerated to a degree that almost defies any modern historical comparison.
Which brings us to Section 2, the inverted casualty ratio.
Now, the absolute volume of casualties is really only half the story. What's truly grim is how modern military logic is being completely upended. You know, in modern warfare, a general rule of thumb is that you can expect about 3 soldiers to be wounded for every 1 soldier killed. That's a 75% wounded to 25% killed ratio. Historically, we've achieved that thanks to advanced medical evacuation, way better body armor, and highly capable field medicine.
But check this out. According to recent Ukrainian intelligence assessments of Russian losses, this standard ratio has completely inverted. We're looking at 62% killed and just 38% wounded. That means roughly 2 Russian soldiers are dying for every single one that gets wounded. It is a total breakdown of modern battlefield medicine. It's basically a throwback to much older, far deadlier eras of combat.
Okay, Section 3, the drone battlefield. So you might be wondering, why exactly is this massive historical inversion happening right now? Well, the primary culprit is the absolute saturation of FPV, or first-person view drones. These are small, highly accurate, and incredibly lethal pieces of tech. They currently saturate the front lines to such a heavy degree that the final 5 to 25 kilometers approaching the point of contact have essentially been turned into an inescapable lethal zone.
And because of that, this incredibly grim sequence is playing out daily. Step 1. A soldier is wounded in combat. Normally, this is where you'd call in a medevac, right? But step 2. Those medevac teams are immediately targeted by the very same drones. So step 3, evacuation becomes almost impossible. Wounded troops who definitely could have been saved under normal circumstances are left stranded for hours, often just bleeding to death in the field.
Moving on to Section 4,
High costs, low gains. When we translate these battlefield realities into total numbers, the independent statistical models paint an eye-watering picture. The maimed list established by Mediazona and the BBC gives us a pure minimum baseline of nearly 218,000 confirmed Russian dead. Just to put that into perspective, that's over 3.5 times the US losses in Vietnam. Meanwhile, the probate registry model, which is a statistical cross-reference of inheritance cases, places total Russian deaths near an astounding 352,000 by the end of 2025. I mean, that is fast approaching the total US fatalities in all of World War II.
And you have to ask, what exactly is being achieved for this immense human sacrifice? 220 kilometers. That is the total amount of land Moscow's forces have managed to capture so far this entire year.
To really put that tiny geographical footprint into context, the total landmass captured by Russia this year is actually slightly smaller than the island of Nantucket in Massachusetts. They aren't inching forward, they are literally millimetering forward.
So when we combine these two metrics together, the massive historical casualties and the absolute bare minimum territory gained, the grim mathematics reveal a truly shocking number: 316. That's the estimated number of Russian soldiers who've been killed or seriously wounded for every single square kilometer of land seized in the Donbass this year.
This whole dynamic was pretty starkly summarized by US Senator Marco Rubio recently, who noted bluntly, the Russians are losing 15 to 20,000 soldiers a month, dead, not injured, dead. It's a bad war.
Now let's shift gears to Section 5, the view from Kyiv.
Look, impartially explaining this conflict means we absolutely have to look at the whole board. Despite these staggering Russian losses, Ukraine is facing its own severe demographic reality. While Russia definitely has a higher absolute death toll, with an estimated 1 in 25 Russian men between 18 and 49 killed or wounded, for Ukraine, which is a much smaller nation, that number is a devastating 1 in 16. They are suffering a significantly higher loss rate as a percentage of their total population.
And this massive demographic strain translates directly to immense operational challenges. We're talking about an ongoing inability to recruit enough troops, which results in relatively porous front lines, not to mention growing resentment toward high command for holding territory at all costs. Plus, in the constantly fluctuating, unpredictable seesaw of the drone tech race, Kyiv is currently struggling to find the sheer manpower needed to capitalize on Russia's battlefield weaknesses.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 6, Reaching a Breaking Point.
Taking all of this data together, the inverted casualty ratios, the immense demographic strains, we are currently seeing a critical inflection point. New Russian recruits entering the ranks are hovering between 24 and 30,000 a month, but total monthly Russian casualties, they're hitting roughly 35,000. So for the first time, Russian casualties are actively outpacing the number of new bodies Moscow can recruit into the ranks.
Because right now, the reality is that Russian forces are losing 5 times as many soldiers a month as the Ukrainians are. And when you combine that with Ukraine currently pulling ahead by innovating, like using unmanned ground vehicles to safely evacuate their own wounded, the underlying tempo of the war is actually showing some real structural signs of turning.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Can authoritarian societies take infinite amounts of punishment, or will the spiraling death toll in Ukraine eventually do to Putin's empire exactly what Afghanistan did to the Soviet Union? It is really the ultimate question of this entire conflict. What happens when a nation's casualty rate finally outpaces its political endurance? Thanks for joining me to explore the data. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you on the next explainer.